Hello and welcome back to the Lapdown podcast. It's an international edition because I'm still in England, but Dan Jads is over in Sri Lanka. So he's all
I
hot and
am.
sweaty. The races are all hot and sweaty. It's just hot and sweatiness all over the place.
It's a hot and sweaty nest of Formula One fans in Sri Lanka. I think I've seen actually no, I've seen nothing
Ah,
even close to resembling anything to do with Formula One. I haven't seen a billboard, an advert. I haven't seen anybody wearing a cap or a T-shirt. I haven't seen anything on the TV. I don't think Formula One is that popular in Sri Lanka. So you can probably expect to see a Sri Lankan Grand Prix being rumored in maybe
yeah.
next year.
Yeah, well, I mean, hey, why not? It get a little bit spicy. We will say as well, obviously, Dan is away, so if we talk over each other, that's a connection issue. If Dan sounds a little bit funky, that's a connection issue. And this episode will probably be a little bit shorter than others because of, wait for it, connection issues. But we wanted to have a little bit of a chat because a lot happened in Mexico. A good chunk of stuff happened in Texas as well, but that's long gone now that we don't even
Oh,
have
that ship
time
has
to
sailed.
we don't even time to ponder that because there's a lot to talk about from Mexico. Um, I think we'll start here. I have a simple question: does Checo Perez survive the year? Go.
Yes, because I just don't know what. Surely we've got this far through. Surely they would have binned him off by now. Surely.
Yes. Yeah. No. I'll go with that. It's for me the only interesting thing because I would have said that before until
Yeah.
Horner came out and seemingly for the first time refused to actually say something remotely confident in Checo. Like I can't remember. I'm
Because
paraphrasing
there is no
slightly.
confidence in him. That's why.
Well, there is that, yeah. But for the first time, he basically said, and I'm paraphrasing, after Mexico, there comes a point where you can't overlook the performances, and we're helping him,
Yeah.
but there comes a point. And when you're
That
starting to
point was
talk
in
about the point,
Bahrain. AB.
yeah,
That point was years ago. You can't see the point anymore.
the point's long gone down the road.
We've passed it. We've skipped it.
Yeah, there's now talk of his boy Mr. Slim that company is not going to be sponsoring Red Bull anymore because of their T-Mobile or AT&T, whichever one of the American telcos
Right.
it
Okay.
is stepping on some toes.
Oh.
And I think we agree the only reason that Checo is sitting down in a car is
Yep.
because of some Mexican telecommunications money. So that potentially
Correct.
doesn't bode well. But
So are we saying
I
that
don't know.
Logan Sargent's going to be the number two at Red Bull for the rest of the season?
Get him in. Get it? Can you imagine? Can you imagine? No, I'm going to make a big call. I think Colapinto might end up in a Red Bull. There's my call. I've made my big call. What I will say, I'll put an immediate asterisk on that. Not the big
Yeah.
boy Red Bull.
Okay.
In the
Yeah.
Red Bull family. Um,
Right.
if I'm Christian Horner, I am going, hey, Liam, sweet. Let's pop you 6 doors down. And when you come into work in the morning, you now park in that bay, not that bay, because you're going to drive in the big
Yeah.
boy team. And we'll have Franco, please, and thank you. Here's £1 billion, Williams. We're going to take your boy because you don't need him next year because you're taking a bloke who is now winning for Ferrari. And I can just see that happening. I can see a V-carb Colapinto and an RBR proper Liam Lawson.
You've gone heavy and hard on Argentine newspapers and reports and things like that, haven't you? You've really kind of brought yourself into this. Does he? I don't want to just poo-poo your idea. I really don't. But I don't know whether the Red Bull kind of family or tree or system or whatever you want to call it
Mm-hmm.
works that way. Like you've got that Isaac Hadjar who would be
Yep.
the next kind of, to use a cliche, cab off a rank, so to speak. And I
Yep.
think would be a really easy way for them to go, Lawson, you go 6 doors down and we'll put Isaac Hadjar in there for the rest of it. And you can,
Mm-hmm.
don't worry about your F2 stuff. And I think that works really well. Um, I don't know, but what I did see though is potentially Colapinto is the second coming of Ayrton Senna, because somebody got a photo of Ayrton Senna once looking in a similar direction to Colapinto, and in that particular angle and particular lighting, there is some uncanny resemblance. Now they are both South American, so
Yes.
potentially it wouldn't be that big of a shock to have seen two people from South America to look remotely similar to one another. They had some kind of floppy haircuts at that particular time, but you never know. Could be
That,
the
yeah.
reincarnation.
It's possible. I mean, there was a fun tweet from Williams that in his 5 races so far, Colapinto hasn't finished below P12, which,
That's wild,
everything
isn't
else
it?
aside, that's fucking wild. Like, well done, my
Yeah.
son. Like, even if you get to the end of the year and just the circumstance of F1, there's only 20 seats and you don't have one of them, great. Even if he never sits in a Formula One car again, I think it's unlikely, but even if he never sits in a Formula One car again, he
Yeah.
can have pictures on his wall and go, you know what? I got given a chance out of a wild situation, and I showed myself. Like, I showed the best version of myself. And
Yeah.
look, it's a bit sort of poetic and whatever, but and he doesn't know who I am, so he doesn't care that I'm proud of him. But I'm bloody proud of the bloke for, to jump into that seat, and it wasn't a one and done thing. To be so
Yeah.
consistently just performing is
I,
seriously good
I
stuff.
think as well, like I think it just highlights the state of Formula One in the fact that he's replaced a bloke who struggled to finish 21st in a 20-car race, and he's walked in there, and the worst he's done, as you said, the worst is 12th. 2 places
Yeah.
outside of points, which is an 8 place, pretty much kind of net increase on the guy that he's replaced. And I think just highlights the fact that not necessarily talent is the way that gets you into this sport. There is a lot of cash
Mhm.
involved, and that's a real shame when you kind of really think about it from a sporting perspective. But yeah, he's done well. I don't see him going to the Red Bull family. I just don't. I don't see them working that way. I think they'll be too invested in their own people. But I would like to see his career continue beyond the end of this season. And I think I'm about to get bitten by a mosquito.
And even if his F1
Carry
career
on.
doesn't work out, the bloke might have an acting career. Because did you see the
Yeah,
Mikado ad that he did? Like,
I didn't know.
on the. He's actually, as far as Formula One, like, stick a driver in a situation of ad goes, well done, Williams. That sort of cross ad livery reveal video thing. Genuinely quite good. Genuinely quite good. Right. Let's talk then. Well, let's stay on the topic of Red Bull. Let's talk
Yeah.
Liam Lawson.
Hmm.
Liam Lawson's making friends up and down that paddock, isn't he? Bye. It was Danny Rick's second coming in Mexico as well, because Mexico's where Danny Rick shot someone down the back straight when he
Yeah.
was doing his mega drive through the field. And
Yeah.
Liam's shot someone, he's just used a different finger.
Ah, yeah. What a day. What a day. Sergio picked the wrong weekend, didn't he, to get his elbows out? Because
Yeah.
this was the weekend that the stewards, which we'll talk about in a short moment, this was the weekend that they decided to actually kind of go, do you know what? Probably shouldn't just run people off the road because
Mm-hmm.
that's a bit dangerous. Perez did exactly that, and Lawson kind of went, "Nah, fuck you," and sent it back on him big time. And Checo didn't particularly like it. And uh, yeah, he's a plucky character. I think he's in that
Yes.
seat. He feels like he's got nothing really to lose, which I kind of agree with him because he's relatively late into it. He's had chances. He got taken back out of it. He's come back in again. And maybe he does think he's got 6 races to win a seat for next year because it's not guaranteed yet. So if he can go out there, get his elbows out, and muscle up against the big boys, which he'll feel as though he did. And I
Mm-hmm.
think his press conference afterwards was like, "Well, I'm not just going to let him drive past me." Highlights exactly that.
Yep.
So yeah, point for Lawson. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, he is slowly ticking off all of, the Spanish speaking drivers on the grid. Like, he's already had a run in with Fernando. He's now had a run in
Yeah,
with Checo as well. And I don't think Carlos was super happy with him with some blue flag situation at one point as well. So he's genuinely working his way through. But no, fair fucks to him. I like it. I like the fact that he's not come
yeah,
in and gone, I'm going to try and keep my nose really clean. I'm going to kiss up to the Red Bulls and jump out of the way and whatever. I mean, he, if anything, fought Checo harder than anyone else that he drove around. There was the
yeah.
wonderful footage of him waiting outside the principal's office, which you said before. It was interesting that Liam was waiting outside the principal's office for a telling off from Christian Horner, and I threw it back to you.
Yeah.
Perhaps he was waiting outside the principal's office to get made head boy, and here's a bit of paper and a pen. We'll see you.
Maybe.
Whatever comes after Brazil, we'll see you there in our garage, because that's what's happening there. But I
Yeah.
love the fact that all the motorhomes are glass fronted. Like, it's almost as if like Liberty or the FIA were like, no, can you make sure that your private spaces are also really visible, please, so that we
Yeah.
can see everything that's going on in the front half of them. It's so good.
Yeah, just don't video
Right.
yourself because
No, don't you
that's
dare.
not on. Don't think
Don't you
about
dare.
that.
No, no, no.
Drive to Survive or
Uh,
nothing.
oh, absolutely. And they're going to have a field day on the fingering. There's going to be a whole
Oh,
episode of Drive to Survive called Liam's
yeah.
Finger. And
Oh
that's
no, they
like,
will.
oh,
They
and
will do well.
yeah,
Before we move on to the next thing, and we kind of just stop talking about cringy media side of things, which obviously
yes.
that will be. Brad Pitt won the Grand Prix, so congratulations to him. I
Well done, Bradley.
can't help but feel that this could be one of the worst pieces of cinematic kind of work in the history of cinema. But I think we'll reserve for judgment because I think that's potentially a video, an episode for the
Oh,
off season, after we've both watched it. But I think it's going to stink. So let's move on quickly and let's talk about the stewards and let's talk about outstanding penalties because they were good penalties this week.
outstanding penalties. It's the best bit of TV overlay work in the history of television. Outstanding penalty. The fact that just the pun for a start, whoever's sat in the booth going putting that together, incredible. The fact they've put like the police lineup height lines behind it as well, just to really
Yeah.
double down on that. I just so good, both the penalty and the graphic in equal measure. I look, this is going to be divisive, I'm sure, in terms of who you support, but you can't watch those two incidents surely and go, you know what? If these were just pure bare carbon cars, which I know they basically
Mhm.
are anyway, but if they were bare carbon cars with black helmets, you didn't know who was who. You can't go, well, you can't do that, and you can't do that. It's the same car that's done both. That's a penalty. That's a penalty. Surely, like taking the situation and the drivers out of it, being objective, it's just two slam dunk penalties, I think.
Yeah, unless you looked at it last week, then it wasn't. But it
No, or it
was,
was half the
it
penalty.
was, but it was if it was for the other driver. But then also the same instant, the guy who drove somebody off the track got the penalty. So
Yes.
I
And then
think that
also you
that's the
had
thing for me.
Sergio Perez doing the same thing, and Liam Lawson doing the
Yeah,
same thing, and Lance Stroll doing the same thing in the space of the identical corners. No further investigation.
it's just consistency. Again, we've said it so many times with this stewarding side of things. They don't need to they don't need to send a message. They don't need to make an example of anybody. They're not there for that. We're not watching your sport. It's a bit like football or cricket. We're not watching that sport for the bloke in the middle with the whistle or the bloke who stands out there in the sunshine in a white coat all day. We don't care. We shouldn't be interested about the fact that the steward this week is Johnny Herbert. So
Yeah.
you're there to
Yeah.
kind of enforce rules to this. You're not the big occasion. Nobody should care. Nobody should know who the person is. And it shouldn't actually have to be someone who's been there and done it. It should be somebody who has an ability to objectionably read and follow the rules that are in place for this particular sport, whatever the sport is, and this one is Formula One. Do I think they were both penalties? Yes. Do I think they were both 10 seconds? It seemed harsh that it ended up being 20 seconds, but I feel as though it was a moment that Formula One decided to kind of go, we need to kind of get this boy back in check because otherwise I think something goes wrong here quite quickly. And one where a wall might be there. Because,
Yeah.
and I think Lewis said about it before the race, before the Grand Prix started, before the weekend started, like, I don't understand at what point you should just be able to go, well, I'm just going to run you off the track because it's easy
Yeah.
at that point. Because, like he said, you can just come off the brakes a little bit earlier, you can make it a little bit lazy, and you can run somebody off the circuit. And you know that you're not going to get penalised, and you know the person that you put off is going to get penalised. And that's wrong. Ideally, if the idea of you're racing inside those white lines, because if you leave those white lines, it's a penalty. There should be some amount of respect there to kind of go, well, I will leave somebody enough
Yeah.
room to be able to try and complete a move. But I do think it was a penalty that was put on Max, two penalties on put on Max to try and stop him from this point onwards to the end of the season from doing something that he potentially regrets or doing something that causes some actual harm to not necessarily a driver, but potentially a cameraman or a steward or a spectator or something like that, which I don't think we were a million miles away from over the last couple of weekends.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just I remember, and it's a weird moment in my mind to have picked out. Do you remember? I think it might have been Danny Rick's first race for Renault in Australia, where off the starting
Reminds me.
line he went to go, around the outside, got a decent run off the line, went to go around the outside, got on the grass a little bit with his like
Yeah.
front right tire, and there was just a little bump in the grass there, and that little bump just meant that his front wing clattered into the rest, and basically the entire front of his car just exploded into a million bits because the
Yeah,
cars
yeah,
are
yeah.
actually,
Yeah.
the most brutal things you've seen in the world. So all you need in theory, and yeah, we're being dramatic about it, but we're quite deliberately being dramatic because these things can happen. All you need in theory is the wrong little molehill or the wrong little rabbit hole in a little bit of grass just at that point that a driver was pushed half a car wide onto the grass by another competitor. Because the wheel was going, 45 degrees left, it just digs into this, and all of a sudden that wheel comes off and that wheel goes under the car, and that means the car, gets propped up onto that wheel, and all of a sudden that car's in the air and lands on top of another car because it's going to be back on the track. No, it's very unlikely to happen, but all of these things can happen, and they happen when cars are on the bit that they aren't supposed to be on, which is hard if you've been pushed out there. What I will say as well on the Lando thing, it was briefly mentioned on the broadcast. It didn't become an issue down the line. Lando got 2 track limits flags for those 2 incidents that Max got penalised for. So he had 2 of his 3 warnings in the space of 4 corners from being pushed off the track.
But how can somebody who is considered to be a victim of somebody else be penalised for that same? I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me, AB. But I think that's what they've done. I think they've tried to kind of send a message there. Will it work until the end of the season? I don't know. I guess it will depend as to how much Max feels as though he's under threat for this World Drivers' Championship in this run-in. I still don't necessarily think he is.
I don't think he is, but I think he thinks he is because he made a couple of comments as well about, well, I don't want to put words in his mouth, or I've seen different bits and different quotes and stuff, and it's hard to know what's opinion and what's actually quotes and stuff sometimes. But I think the consensus is that as far as Max was concerned, as long as Lando didn't win, it was damage limitation, and actually Max saved himself 3 points in that battle by making sure that Lando, it wasn't P1 to P4, it was P3 to P or P2 or whatever. That's concerning that you've got a bloke who's running his own race that's just about different. He's just doing a maths race or whatever. But we'll see. I think there was that drivers' meeting, wasn't there, where George Russell's come out and said 19 out of the 20 drivers are in favour of us changing the driving standards document immediately because we've agreed there's a problem. I wonder who the other one was. And there was a wonderful quote from Lewis Hamilton where he said, I was obviously a few cars back, but I saw a load of dust and stuff going up, and I thought, well, that's obviously Max. And when you've got... It's both funny and horrifying, isn't it? That they just... If you've got drivers knowing if there's an incident up ahead, obviously who the driver was that was involved. But hey, we'll see what happens in Brazil. It's not as if Brazil's a really tight track with some hairpins and some tight corners at different points, is it? That's not setting us up for disaster.
No, there's a few bits of runoff as well that people have exploited in the past, looking back to 2021, which I think one of the 2 drivers from Mexico might have used at points. So, worth looking into. Look, this has been going on for 18 minutes, and I'm slightly terrified that it might not actually be able to upload. So, look, Alex, you're still streaming video games on Hey Look It's Alex on Twitch?
Still streaming video games on Hey Look It's Alex. You're not currently uploading videos on Dan Jads, but you will be again soon once, God forbid, you've actually had a break.
I will be. That is the plan. So, look, we'll watch Brazil, and we'll be back for a proper chinwag next week.
Exactly. Thank you for listening. As ever, you can follow us on Lapdown Pod at various different points. You can send us an email if you want. We have an email from Andrew that we need to talk about. We didn't have time from today. If you want to join that, we'll have a chat about them next week. And leave a review as well. That's it from us. Goodbye.
Cheers.